Hi, and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast with Grant and Louise Bentley. We have run the Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy since 1995. We are both qualified practicing homeopaths, and Grant is also a naturopath. Together, we discovered a link between energy and facial structure based on traditional ideas from homeopathy that have roots going back 200 years. This project is called Homeopathic Facial Analysis, or HFA for short, and has been the cornerstone of clinical diagnosis and training courses since 1999. Between us, we have written and produced 7 HFA books, including Soul and Survival. Soul and Survival is the philosophy of energy influencing matter and how this energy forms individual facial structure, our unconscious drives and fears, our life patterns, and universal time cycles.
Welcome back, everybody, to this next episode of Soul and Survival. Welcome to you, Louise.
Thanks, Grant. How are you today?
Oh, not too bad. Thank you very much. And so, how are you?
I'm all right. I've got an idea. So, but you were going to continue on with last time you were talking about overdoing. You know, you've got to be careful about overdoing. We were talking about.
Oh no, it wasn't. No. I remember it wasn't about us overdoing. Although you're right, we do have to We have to be very cautious of that. I think one of the big things that we can do as practitioners is to absolutely overdo and get our interpretations in the way of the only facts that we have are the subjective feelings of the patient that's in front of us.
Called signs and symptoms.
And we have to go by those and those alone. Not sort of turn around and say, I think that this person's trying to tell me, or I think they're this sort of person. No, just go by the facts. And those,
Can I make a comment there? Because I read something this week in a book where someone was talking, it's just in a novel, but they were talking about the fact that this person in the book, the subject of their discussion, was not having any symptoms, and they were talking about a medical diagnosis as if a symptom is something that only leads to a medical diagnosis. Whereas I think we've got to remember in homeopathy, a symptom is anything the patient experiences. It may have nothing to do with any particular diagnosis. It might. We don't mind so much about that pathway. We just want the interpretation, the patient's interpretation, so we can find a rubric that matches to approving of a remedy, so we can kind of lock and key the whole thing. And I think that's I think a lot of patients say things like, oh, that symptom doesn't matter. I had tests. It's nothing. You know what I mean? That kind of thinking.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It's the association with symptoms equals pain. But symptoms are more than that. They're any deviation away from normalcy, really. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the intricacies, of the vital force really come in, because they start telling you functional signs and symptoms before there's structural signs and symptoms. They're telling you that something's going awry.
Which gives us time.
Yeah. They remember that the signs and symptoms, the vital force tells you, because it's the very thing that's monitoring it right down to the cellular level. So it understands the most minute disturbance in your body. Now, what those symptoms mean and why you suddenly start craving a certain sort of food or a certain indigestible or whatever it might be, or why you start, your moods just feel a little different, or there can be 1,000 different variances that are so subtle.
And important, different to the normal, not your normal personality, different to normal. You've got to define what normal is for the individual too, which in itself is a bit of an art form.
Well, only they can do that. And that's the thing. And all of a sudden, my interpretation of what you are starts to become ludicrous, because that sort of says that, I'm picking up at you at a cellular level, you've got to be joking. I can't do that. I mean, you can't. You can do it, but even you don't pick it up half the time because we're so busy doing other things that we don't focus on it. We only start focusing on it when it starts to turn to pain. So, Hahnemann always used to say, be cautious of the symptomless disease, but, I don't think there is any. It's just that you decided to ignore or not see the changes as symptoms. But any change from normalcy is essentially a symptom.
And so it's the homeopath's job too, and this is something that it's kind of hard to teach, but I know you do it really well, and I think I do it quite well too, that you have to almost train the patient. You have to give them examples. You have to get them to try to explain things. I've always found a really good routine. I know this is a bit dull in the big picture of talking, the philosophy and all, but just a strategy is you wake up in the morning, tell me what you experience from the moment you open your eyes. Tell me about your body. Tell me what your body tells you. And sometimes just phrasing it in that different way, they're more able to start to explain what they're experiencing, and you can pick up 2, 3, 4, 5 rubrics in 10 minutes. And they haven't even hit 10 a.m., Yeah. And it's a really nice strategy for just helping a patient to share the experience of what it's like to be them.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds pretty valuable. And it also explains too why people need to be patient with us a little bit, because we don't always get things first, second, third, sometimes even not fourth go, but usually we're starting to get somewhere, because it takes a couple of goes to start instructing patients on what to look for. You rarely get it first go. Sometimes with the facial analysis you can get it first go.
I'm going to just dispute that slightly by saying statistically you get a start. Now, start is not get it, as in cure or whatever you want to determine it, but you do get a start in around 50%. And it might only be 10 or 20% movement, but it's a start. It's telling you the body is willing to listen to the instruction of the remedy and take that energy and put it into its program and continue its own personal healing at a stronger level than prior to the remedy. And that's a big deal, getting a start in 50%. So I do think the facial analysis is really huge in that regard. And then, of course, it's a case management issue, which is a whole different topic.
But gathering the information can be really difficult if people aren't used to it.
Of course, and most aren't.
And most aren't. Mm. And because, the first thing that people like to do is that they like to tell you all their aches and pains of either themselves or their child. And then they spend so much time trying to make sure that I understand what medications they're on.
And what the diagnosis is.
And what the diagnosis is and so on. And they're just generally, as a first timer, not quite ready for the fact that, yes, okay, it's not irrelevant information, but it's not highly relevant
It's not relevant for choosing the remedy.
No, it's not relevant.
But it's relevant as a point in time that you measure from. So, they've come in June.
I don't mind the tests. I don't look. I always sort of say to people that they should get whatever tests that they feel that they need to get done, because it becomes a measuring tool as to how well that I'm doing. Except in certain circumstances. Now, one of those circumstances, some of these circumstances, you need more time, right? So, for example, when you're dealing with pandas kids, most of these kids are going to come back from functional medicine doctors with...
Who do a lot of blood tests.
Well, they do a lot of blood tests, but they're going to come back with diagnoses that this kid is pretty much reactive and allergic to everything. They have nearly every mycobacteria. There are a lot of parasites. They've got mold and other fungal infections. They've got food allergies. They've got strep, they've got Bartonella, they've got Babesia, it can be either all or a majority of any of those just mentioned. And this used to fool me for a little while, because I used to sort of think to myself, well, how am I ever going to treat these people? Because, they're just so microbed and so reactive. How are you going to deal with this? And then I started understanding, because I just thought, oh, well, look, you just go back to homeopathy. Don't go naturopathic and try and deal with each bit at a time. Just go homeopathic, see the constitution for what it is. And I saw so many people respond in such a positive way. And then over time,
so did the tests.
Test. But sometimes, and this is what I mean, that there's contradictions. Sometimes those tests will still show the presence of strep, still show the presence of mycobacteria and so on, but at the same time the person's improving. Now, I learned two things from that. One is that when your nervous system is out, so too is your immune system, right? Now, that's not a huge surprise, because, as alternative practitioners, we're either know or we should know that we are holistic. That's what holism means, the one out, all out, right? But we don't put it into practice all that much. We don't put it into a true understanding. When we still see the immune system and the nervous system as being two separate things, they're not. They're one and the same. The nervous system is telling the brain that something's wrong. There's danger somewhere, but it doesn't know where. But to combat that danger, it sends your muscles into not a spasm, but a state of tension, because that's your fight or flight response. And then also too, it sends your immune system out searching for whatever might be an invader. Now, if that goes on for long enough in a disproportionate manner, it's going to start reacting to everything that you test for. Do you see what I mean?
Oh,
so now what you do...
And you could say they're also cofactors rather than causative factors.
Well, they're false positives.
Yeah.
They're telling you, the sheer weight of numbers is telling you that these are not affecting you as individual agents. What the real problem is that your immune system is overreacting and not switching itself off.
And your nervous system, and then why? What's going on there? So, yeah, that's where you sort of roll backwards.
But the other thing that I learned, though, is that you can... I've learned to disregard the tests of what may still be present in the body, because if you've still got strep somewhere in the body, but this patient in front of me is improving continuously, both physically, emotionally and mentally, but the tests still show the presence of strep, I don't worry about those tests.
And it would be so nice if everyone understood that, because I know that people cut in at a certain point. They like to keep getting the tests. They feel like it's information that they can't see, and now they can kind of see it. There's numbers on the page. And then what they go and do is they go into these detoxification models to try and, get rid of the little thing that's there. That's often just too harsh for that poor patient. They often go backwards. It's a real shame. If someone's going forwards, you say this, if a patient just can be patient and listen to you and take their time, and don't over-meddle, don't interfere, but take the instruction on the diet, the exercise, reducing the environmental stress, go out in nature, get some real quiet quality time, that patient can really improve. But the moment you muddle and meddle, they tend to start rolling backwards a bit.
Look, it's absolutely true. You know firsthand that compliance is a major issue here.
It's huge.
The more compliant a patient is with the instructions, the quicker we'll get there. But I'm never I never sort of do a Kent and jump up and down and sort of tell people off, because mums are anxious,
and everybody thinks more is better. I mean, our whole culture is built around more
is better.
Well,
it is. What it is
That's
that
materialism.
Here's our fight, here's our journey, here's our hero's quest, is to overcome this impediment in either myself or my child, and I'm going to throw everything at it.
I need a big army, yeah.
Never understanding that that's mistake number one. The very fact that you have a pathology means that your immune system and nervous system is already confused, and if you imagine yourself in a state of confusion, you're so easily overloaded.
Yeah,
absolutely. And when you start adding in a whole lot of things, these kids or adults, their systems can become overloaded really, really quickly. It's actually you get much better results by scaling down in the medicaments, not up.
Yeah, which is a hard message.
But it's almost impossible for people to understand. So what I try and do is just, earn people's trust in that time. Look, it's a difficult road, because like a lot of things, I've said to you once before, you should never underestimate the human being's capacity to get things completely arse up.
And you've also, I'll add this too, just from a safe perspective, both legally and biologically, when people are already on medications, their body's adapted to that. You can't just remove them, and legally you can't either. That's up to the practitioner who prescribed them in the first place. So people have to understand it's not about just dumping everything either. You have to be gradual. You have to work with whoever prescribed that medication. But here's a thing that would be really nice. Don't start a new one. Hey, just don't start a new one.
Well, we say that, but that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference.
I know. Hey, can I take you off track? Because there was a topic I really wanted to. Is that okay to go into?
Yeah.
Which is way back when we first met. You said to me one day, "What's the difference between Hahnemann and Kent?" And of course, we learned a lot about Hahnemann and we learned a lot about Kent. And I couldn't answer that question. You answered it for me, and I'm going to get you to do that. But before you do, I wanted to read out a poem that James Tyler Kent, and for those who don't know, Hahnemann's the founder of homeopathy, 1755 to 1843, and Kent was, I think, born in 1849, so 6 years after Hahnemann died, and I think he died around 1916. And both have been, hugely impacting on homeopathy. But from your point of view, there's a difference. But I wanted to read this poem. This is a poem that James Tyler Kent wrote to his gratitude toward Hahnemann. And it's a poem that my graduating class gave you, our teacher at the time, as a gift. We got a calligrapher to hand do this beautiful poem. So anyway, I've got a copy of it. So I wanted to read out the poem, and then I wanted you to comment on the poem and Kent and Hahnemann. So this is James Tyler Kent saying, "With independence we are able to go on, climbing the mountain of homeopathic truth. Some say we are at the top. Be not so sure. We have but climbed a foothill. Soon will we see a mountain beyond, with but the faintest trace of human footprints. We follow on, though the mountain side be steep and thorny, led by the light of truth. Soon the toilers grow weary, and their number becomes smaller. In the distant past there is a multitude, while the valleys below still throng with conflicting millions. The few toil on up the steep and rocky mountainsides, steeper, more rocky as they press onward. The distance brings to view the heavens, dotted with nebulous sky and space beyond. There is to be seen another mountain, far away and much higher, which is yet to be climbed, upon which, through the clear sky, above the clouds, behold the immortal Hahnemann." It's beautiful, isn't it? So, what's the difference between Hahnemann and Kent? What do you get out of just thinking about that poem and those two incredibly famous characters in homeopathy?
It became a little controversial in my mind because it became clear to me that Hahnemann and Kent were not saying the same thing. They thought they were, And as a student, I was taught they were, and I accepted that they were. But then later on, I realised that no, they're not. And one of the things, but that doesn't decrease my reverence for Kent. I think Kent's right up there. I do. However, when you're talking about the person that was living in, the late 1700s and the early 1800s, and with their own mind pieced together the entirety of homeopathy, including the succussion, the dilution, the proving, the writing down of. He just developed the whole. There wouldn't be a system without Hahnemann. That's why he's standing on the mountaintop that hardly anyone can reach, because that kind of mind that could develop that in the first place is just insane. We still don't even... most homeopaths, me included, don't understand the capacity of this. This is huge. What Hahnemann's done is that he's developed a microcosm for understanding not only all physical life, but all interdimensional life, like what we were speaking about last week. And we know that it goes interdimensionally because that's essentially what a miasm is. It's an interdimensional information dump into every single creature that belongs to that wavelength. So every miasm is a wavelength, and it's slightly different from the other miasms, which are on another wavelength. Yes, there are some crossovers, but essentially that wavelength captures everything within that frequency, and it dumps it into what I call the unconscious, which is not the subconscious of Freud or Jung, but it's an unconscious. It surrounds us, and even that. So that is all part of the vital force, what he calls the vital force. But that's not the mind, and nor is it the soul. And he's very specific on that.
This is Hahnemann.
This is Hahnemann. He's very specific on that. I always quote that aphorism 9, but that aphorism 9 is really, really important. And that aphorism 9 is telling you that the vital force, as Hahnemann understands it, as sophisticated as what it may be, is different from your mind. Right? But Kent, I think, has made a little bit of a mistake by linking the two, almost in a soul sort of way. And he even goes and says at one stage, it doesn't matter if the person in their pathology is getting better, providing they feel better. And that even in that's not true. I don't believe that. No. If you're getting better, then your results should say that you're getting better. That lump should go down. That bleeding should stop. That, you've got to be showing that physical output as well. But Kent took the vital force as almost interchangeable with the mind and the spirit of the person, the personality of the person. And that's led from that point to what we now know as the drug pictures, which, as I've said over and over again, I don't think they're right. Doesn't mean that they're wrong.
They're not wholly right. They're just a little cherry-picking exercise. It's too small.
It's a shot in the dark,
yeah.
Right? You get somebody who comes to you and they're weepy and they're complaining. You go, okay, I think I'll give them pulsatilla. But you're ignoring the 10,000 other aspects of pulsatilla, and you're also saying that pulsatilla are the only ones that are weepy. Or like Ignatia. I'll give Ignatia for grief. Like no other remedy has grief in it.
Just look at the rubrics.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's nonsense. And then we build up these pictures that are so incomplete, they're virtually wrong. They're right in the sense that they do exist, but they're so limited that I don't know why we use them at all.
Once you even just look at a proving and look at the repertory, you got to question that and go, what? I remember this, this is years and years and years ago when you were sort of starting this whole thinking process, and we transitioned from, the Kentian model, the Hahnemann model, Bonninghausen. We had all of it thrown at us, which was great, but definitely you could see differences. So everyone kind of chose their, position. And we were doing this case in student clinic one day, and this poor woman came in and she was really, really grief-stricken as part of her story, but she had some symptoms, as well, as most people do. And you were by then insisting that we repertorise properly as a student group, which we did. But you were also starting the facial stuff, and you were sort of experimenting with it. And you said, well, let's look at her facial structure. And you came up with purple as the most likely, which is pretty good given how early in the phase of all that we were. But it was right as it turned out. And you repertorised on a few things, but not the grief. You didn't repertorise on the grief. You repertorised on a few other things, and lachesis came up. So she was given that. And I remember one of the students who was really into the idea of drug pictures, and they actually left the college after that, which was kind of interesting. I bet they're not in practice anymore, but there you go. But they said to you, but what about the grief? And you said, oh, well, the rest of the symptoms will cover the picture. And as it turned out, the patient came back and their symptoms were starting to improve and they felt better within themselves, etc. And I remember looking up the repertory because at that point, I was a bit like that student. Ignatia was the high remedy for grief. And I looked and there was lachesis in bold, number 3, under grief. There it was. And yet we weren't taught that about lachesis when we went through that drug picture learning phase. It's just a reminder that these drug pictures are so limited that you wouldn't have picked lachesis. And given that she was in the purple miasm and Ignatia is not in that miasm, it's highly unlikely Ignatia would have done anywhere near as much as what the lachesis did.
No, that's right, because it wasn't in her group for a start. So one of these days we'll explain what that means, I guess, to be part of a group and why it's important for remedy selection, and maybe even today if we get onto it. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, and that sort of pigeonholing, we don't want to do it with people. So why would we do it with remedies? I mean, we know that if we sort of say, well, that person, they like onions and they're better for breathing fresh air. I mean, well, whoop-de-doo. What does that really tell you about them?
It's a form of ism. It's a remedy-ism.
The other thing, so that's one area where Kent was, I think, different to Hahnemann. Hahnemann was the one that said, yes, the mentals are important when they are a deviation away from normal. Now, that I think is really important. But also, too, Hahnemann's saying understand the PQRS is really important. So when you give the idea of, that loss and then the subsequent grief, well, the grief is hardly a PQRS considering the loss that woman had gone through. Right? So that doesn't mean to say that it isn't influential. But like you said when you looked it up, I mean, the majority of remedies will have grief in it. But why we came to lachesis were the other symptoms, like modalities and so on. Now, I'll touch on that too, because Hahnemann talks about how the PQRS symptoms are really important because they're individualistic to that particular patient. And in order to understand what those individualized symptoms, when you do a proving, get up, walk around, sit down, go into the heat, go into the cold, go out at night, get up in the morning, have a look at how those different circumstances influence your condition, because that's where the PQRSs lie.
I feel like PQRS, peculiar, queer, rare, strange, in that very 1800s way, it kind of implies that there's something really unusual about the symptom, whereas, being worse for heat or cold or pressure or movement is not an unusual state. I actually think that throws us off.
Well, that's what Hahnemann called a PQRS. What Kent says is a PQRS is quite different. Kent's really going down the avenue of the exceptionally strange. They're almost completely unique. But that's in fact not what Hahnemann was going on about. Hahnemann essentially talked about, if you want to individualise a case, you get the sum totals of the modalities.
And it's the sum total. So it's 5, 6, 7, 8 somewhat general and maybe not even all that unique things. But when you cross them, the combination...
The combination is unique. Look, it's the same with human beings, isn't it? Those... just a few DNA strands and look what happens. But it depends on the combination of them all.
Yeah.
And it's so, yes, being worse in the morning or, better in the, when it rains or something, by itself doesn't really mean anything. But the combination of all those things means something. But what Kent did is Kent took it further into the extremely rare.
Yeah.
Right?
And the irony of that, if you practice that way, and we've done it all because we were taught everything everybody else is taught. It's not like, we started from a different place. But I remember a patient one day having a really rare, something to do with their mouth. I can't even remember what it was, but it was some strange thing that their mouth did under certain circumstances. And I remember going, oh, wow, writing it down. And I even explained to them, oh, that's really interesting. That will help me find a remedy. Then I went in and looked, and I couldn't find that symptom anywhere or anything even remotely like it. Like
no.
you can sometimes sort of extrapolate and sort of step a little bit to the right or the left and get a rubric that sort of kind of covers that idea. But this was nowhere to be found.
Well, you see, now what you're doing is that you're moving away from Hahnemann and you're going into the intellectual realm of another homeopathic giant, and that's Bonninghausen. Now, we couldn't practice at all if it wasn't for Bonninghausen. He's not...
Now, just to let everybody know, and I don't know his dates exactly, but he was a German... lawyer who got into homeopathy. He actually cured a very, very horrible problem he had by going through the alphabet and coming to almost, I think, the letter T before he found a remedy that took him out of extreme pain and helped him. But he was a lawyer, and he wrote to Hahnemann but never met him. So he's around in the 30s, 40s, somewhere there. And they never met, but they had, I don't know if their letters are there somewhere, but I believe they probably still are.
I got a feeling, didn't one of Hahnemann's daughters marry of his
stepson or something. It's kind of, there is a link there.
There ended up a blending of their families somewhere.
There is a link.
The line.
I don't know whether it could have been Melanie, but Melanie's adopted daughter and Bonninghausen's grandson, or I don't know, something like that. I'd have to look that one up. But the thing is, just to let people know that Bonninghausen was a lay homeopath. He wasn't medical, but he was a lawyer, and he had a very systemised mind, and he communicated with Hahnemann, and you can continue on.
Well, what he did is kind of, he brought into life what you're talking about. When you're talking about you had a PQRS symptom in a patient, but, good luck finding it in the repertory. You couldn't even find it. And you know what? I've done ones where I've had absolutely strange symptoms, and I've found it, and it didn't work, by the way.
Isn't that interesting?
So it
not enough on its own.
Not enough on its own. But anyway, Bonninghausen, first of all, Hahnemann's was the person who did the first repertory, but it's almost unusable. So what Bonninghausen did is he said, right, I'm going to systematise this.
I get the impression Hahnemann was a genius, but not organised in some ways.
Well, perhaps not. Yeah, perhaps not. Certainly his life wasn't. I mean, when you look at his kids and you tell the story about how he gives up his last bit of bread just to feed his children because they're
so poor, yet he's a qualified doctor.
Yeah.
And I think he has like 11 kids and none of them married, which is really, I know that's judgmental, but 11.
But didn't we just say one of them married Bonninghausen's?
No, that was his second wife, Melanie's stepdaughter.
Oh, was it?
Right? None of his children married. That's kind of... reflective of something that's not, that's a whole story
at
in itself.
A personal level, something was going on there.
I think he's just really intense, and I think his intensity was a little harsh on his family.
Yeah, well, all ideals come at a cost, don't they?
Absolutely.
So anyway, Bonninghausen has said, okay, I through his own personal experience, I think it was a twisted bowel, if I remember rightly, and he took Thuya.
Yeah, and his facial structure, interestingly enough, you're only looking at paintings and sketches from that time, but you would probably put him in that miasm from his facial structure.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, he becomes this huge advocate, and he sort of looks at Hahnemann's work when he does his first repertory, and he sort of, I can sort of see him going, nah. No one's ever going to get
Can't
this.
follow it.
You
try reading Hahnemann's Materia Medica, and I don't even know if his repertory's in print, is it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I certainly don't have it if it is. But so he said, okay, well, we've got to systematise this. And this is where his legal brain came in. What's hearsay and what's fact? And so that's when he did, although in his repertory, he does a categorisation of 1 to 5, whereas in Kent's repertory it's 1 to 3, meaning that, say in Kent's repertory, a remedy for grief that is in bold, or a 3, is repertorised, re-repertorised, clinically verified. A 2 is repertorised and clinically verified, and then a 1 is clinically verified, meaning that you've given it and this symptom's gone away, but it never came up in the proving. So, Bonninghausen sort of laid down those rules. Kent changed it from a rating of 1 to 5 to 1 to 3. But
it's still okay.
No. I'm not saying it isn't okay. I'm just simply saying, but it was Bonninghausen's idea to begin with.
Yeah.
But the other thing that Bonninghausen did do is when you look at Bonninghausen's therapeutic pocketbook, which is a repertory, the amount of mentals by comparison to Kent is so few in its number. You have to think, well, what's going on? Is this just evolution, and now Kent is this genius that's expanded on it and really hit on what homeopathy is really all about, whereas Bonninghausen didn't? The answer is no. Bonninghausen, coming back to your original statement that, you look for the PQRS but you couldn't find it anywhere, he was the one that originally said, look, all of these individual symptoms, these PQRS type of symptoms, are all well and groovy, but one is that you have to reproduce them in exact language, and the problem with linguistics is that it's ever-changing. And what happens if somebody experiences exactly that symptom to a degree, but their expression of it is a variance of that? Now, if you've put it in... Now, for example...
It's not going to be calc fleur, is it?
It wasn't going to be, but let's do calc fleur.
Corn stalk fiddle.
A sensation like a corn stalk fiddle in
calc fleur.
In the head.
Yeah.
Right, is calc fleur. I was going to do sunicular, but I'll do calc fleur. So calc fleur has the sensation as if a cornstalk fiddle is playing in the head. Now, I don't really know what a cornstalk fiddle is, but I'm assuming it's a really squeaky sort of sound. But what Bonninghausen was saying in his incredibly insightful way was, what are the chances of someone 100 years later saying exactly that same phrase? So if you put that sound into the repertory and you put in fiddle, cornstalk, as if, and then you put it under the head, then what's the chances of someone else actually coming up with the same linguistics to explain that noise that they're hearing? What happens if they come in and they say it's like a squid, like someone's got a cat by the tail? What are you going to do? You're not going to look. You're not going to look up fiddle, cornstalk, as if. You're going to look up cat.
Yeah.
Grab by the tail, as if.
Yeah.
Now, the fact is that this person, they might be experiencing the same vibration or the same sound in their head, but the way that they express that is completely different. Why would you express that if you've never heard what a cornstalk fiddle is?
Well, these days people probably don't even know what a fiddle is as an instrument. Do you know what I mean? Like, they wouldn't even... there's so many things in that. So he was very insightful.
He was very insightful. So what he did is that he put the mentals down to really broad categories, and he emphasised the modalities. Absolutely emphasised the modalities, because somebody who's got a pain in their hip that's worse for when they rise up and worse for lying on the painful side is still going to express it in exactly that same way in 200 years' time. And he's absolutely spot on.
Well, it's come to pass, because we're not quite at 200 years from his repertory, but it'd be... I reckon we're within 15 or 20. I think it's 1840s or something. We'd have to look that up to.
In closing, I would say the difference between Kent and Hahnemann is that Kent personalised and turned almost into a personality and a soul the vital force, which was absolutely not what Hahnemann said it was. Absolutely not. Now, you might sort of say, well, that's just one area, but that is a big area, man. That's a big area.
Huge. And it's pivotal for where homeopathy is.
And it changed the whole way we practiced. The way we practice now is not Hahnemannian. HFA is Hahnemannian. But contemporary homeopathy is not Hahnemannian homeopathy, it's Kentian. And so, what's the difference? Well, what we just said.
Yeah.
One is that remedies are expressions of self. You can see deep personality in the remedy. You can see the soul in the remedy. And that remedy can change your whole mental outlook and your whole perspective of life, and it can rearrange what you think, give you some willpower, give up what you don't want to do.
Help you make your bed in the morning.
And that's just nonsense. Because what a remedy does, a remedy will help you make the right decisions, but it'll help you make the right decisions because it takes you out of a state of stress.
And it becomes, now it's a more authentic you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And remember, like what we said earlier in some of the podcasts, is that you have an instinct you and you have a consciousness you. And the deciding factor as to which one of these dimensions you live in is the stress that you're under. If you're under a lot of stress, you become your instinctive you. It's like that sort of Snickers ad, where somebody is sort of yelling at other people and they're being generally obnoxious, and then they have a Snickers bar and they're not hungry anymore and they become nice and pleasant. That, I might have the wrong confectionery company, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
They don't also show you 30 minutes later when you're having a hyperglycemic attack.
No, they don't want to tell you that.
But
30 years later.
But you know what I mean. If you lose a lot of sleep, you're really hungry, you're really stressed, you are not in your best state of mind.
But you're still you, but you're just the worst you as opposed to the best you.
But you can say things. You can say things in an argument, for example, that are just downright awful that you would never say if you weren't in that stress state.
Yeah.
And even when you come out of that stress state, then you apologise for the things that you said in your stress state because you don't mean them. Well, you meant them at the time, but you didn't mean to say them because you don't want to be that hurtful to somebody. But when you're in a self-protective state, you'll do whatever is necessary. And that doesn't... Yes, it's you. But it's the worst of you. It's the self-protective you. As we say in Soul and Survival, it's you versus the world rather than you in the world.
Can I just end with something that's just come into my head in regard to...
Can I just wait?
Yes.
So that's where he's different from Hahnemann. Where he's different from Bonninghausen is that I think he made the repertory more unusable. Until the computer came along, computer programs, and we do complete dynamics mostly, until the computer program came along, when I went back in the 80s, the one repertory that I used consistently was Bonninghausen's Therapeutic Pocketbook. It was the one that gave me the best results all the time. And so that's why I'm so big on making sure you get these modalities, because the difference between Kent and Bonninghausen, which was personally proven by my success rate, was the fact that Bonninghausen focused on modalities and Kent focused on as individualised mentals as possible.
And physicals too.
And clinically, that told me that was a mistake.
Yeah.
That's a mistake to do.
You know what we could do? I'll put this down as a note, but I wouldn't mind looking at the life theme of Hahnemann, Kent and Bonninghausen, because what I don't know what happened to Bonninghausen, but we can research that. But we know that Hahnemann ended up living till 88, and he took a huge shift in the last 6, 7, 8 years of his life. He left Germany, he went to Paris, he remarried, he became a celebrity in many ways. He became faded, he got a lot of attention, he made a lot of money. Like, his whole life changed. You could say he ended on a bit of a high after being a recluse for a couple of decades prior to that. And Kent, 1849, 51 plus 16, what's that? He dies at 67, which is 21 years younger than Hahnemann. And he died a broken man out in Montana somewhere. I believe he was a recluse and he was bitter. He was bitter about the state of homeopathy, the homeopaths within it, the whole thing. He wasn't in a very good place. So that alone kind of tells you something too, doesn't it?
It does, but, just as it seems like, well, what the hell was Kent even born for? What a waste of space. I'm going to tell you, I love Kent. I love a lot of his writings. I really do. I think Kent's philosophy is fantastic. And I'll tell you another thing. At the end of his book, where it's... he does the Kent's 12 observations, and it's at the end of his lectures, I think. Or is it lesser writings?
Well, there's 2 books. There's Kent's lectures and Kent's lesser writings.
I think it's at the end of his lesser writings, and it does the 12 observations of Kent. I use that every single day. I judge by that. That and Herring's Law. Right, those 2 things have kept me in such good stead. They have kept me holding on to a remedy and not changing when perhaps in the past and with a little less experience I would have changed. Or it's helped me not panic because certain symptoms have come up, not panicking and holding course. And in the end, it works out really well. So his 12 observations combined with Herring's Law has really been a godsend for my clinic. And I use it constantly. It's the basis of my case management. And like I've said to you many, many times, if you think that remedy selection is where the bulk of individualisation rests, meaning what remedy do I choose for you, you need to stop and you need to go back to school because you're getting it wrong.
Well, can I just do a plug for the HFA online course, which basically in 50 classes, intro then advanced, takes you right through all this thinking process so that you can actually now apply it clinically.
Yeah, because it truly is. It really, case management is how the person is responding as they're coming out of this stress state and what to do next. Because sometimes you go up the scale, sometimes you go down, sometimes you increase the frequency, sometimes you decrease the frequency, sometimes you change a remedy. So how do I know when to do all of this? Well, you need to by case management. And case management, or my case management, which works really well, as you know, is based essentially around Herring's Law and Kent's 12 observations.
This is definitely another episode in all of that. So are you ready to give it a rest for today?
Yeah, I'll give it a rest.
Okay.
All right, see you later.
Thank you, Grant. Thanks for listening to Soul and Survival. If you are interested in more information, books, courses, consultations, learning more about facial analysis or life themes, please visit our college site, Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, vcch.org.